The kennels at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado fell silent the moment Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen walked through the gate. It wasn't respect that quieted the voices. It was disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered Master Chief Rick Donovan, loud enough for everyone to hear. He stood with his arms crossed, a 20-year veteran of the K-9 program with a face like weathered leather. "They're sending a woman to handle Titan." Sarah heard him clearly. She'd been hearing comments like that for the past 12 years, through Bud-S training, through her deployment to Afghanistan, through every door she'd had to kick down twice as hard as the men beside her. She kept walking, her boots crunching on the gravel path, her face calm as still water. "Not just any woman," someone else added with a dark laugh. "A SEAL, like that's supposed to impress a dog that's already put 3 handlers in the hospital." The April sun beat down on the California compound, glinting off the chain-link fences that surrounded the training yards. Sarah could see him now in the far isolation pen, a massive Belgian Malinois with a coat like burnished copper and eyes that seemed to calculate the distance to your throat. Titan. Even his name was a challenge. She'd read his file on the flight from Virginia Beach. 18 months old, bred from championship working lines in Europe, IQ off the charts, attack skills that made seasoned operators nervous, but completely, utterly unmanageable. He'd bitten his first handler during basic obedience, sent his second to the ER with a torn rotator cuff, put his third in the hospital just last week with bite wounds that required 30 stitches. The Navy had invested nearly $40,000 in this dog. Now they were ready to cut their losses and put him down. Sarah stopped at the fence. Titan was packing along the far wall, a relentless back-and-forth pattern that spoke of intelligence turned to frustration. His muscles rippled under his coat. He hadn't looked at her yet, but she knew he was aware of every person in the compound. "Commander Chen." The voice came from behind her, Captain James Fletcher, the officer who'd requested her transfer. He was the only one who'd voted against euthanizing Titan. "Thank you for coming." "Sir?" Sarah turned, offering a crisp nod. Fletcher was in his 50s, with gray hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too many good animals destroyed because men couldn't understand them. "I'll be honest with you," Fletcher said quietly, positioning himself so the other handlers couldn't hear. "Most of the team thinks I'm wasting your time. They think Titan's beyond saving. They also think," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "they think sending a female handler is either desperation or political correctness gone wrong." Sarah allowed herself a small, cold smile. "What do you think, sir?" "I think you handled a military working dog in Helmand Province that everyone else said was ruined by trauma. I think you brought that dog home and he's now working with a veteran in Montana, helping a former Marine with PTSD get through each day." Fletcher's gaze was steady. "I think if anyone can read what's broken in that animal, it's you. But I'll be straight, you've got 2 weeks. That's all the brass will give me. 2 weeks to show progress or Titan gets put down." "Understood, sir." "And Commander," Fletcher's voice dropped even lower, "watch your back in there, the men. They're not all on board with this." Sarah had already figured that out. She could feel the stares burning into her shoulders, hear the muttered comments just quiet enough to maintain deniability. She was used to being the only woman in the room. She was used to proving herself over and over again, while men with half her qualifications got assumed competence. She turned back to the fence. Titan had stopped packing. Now he sat perfectly still, watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. There was intelligence there, fierce, trapped, dangerous intelligence. "Can I see the incident reports?" Sarah asked. A junior handler, barely 22, with nervous energy, hurried over with a tablet. "They're all here, ma'am. Every incident logged." Sarah scrolled through the reports, her trained eye-catching details others had missed. The first handler had tried to dominate Titan with aggressive corrections. The second had used shock collar training, ramping up the voltage when Titan didn't comply. The third had attempted a bonding approach but had pushed physical affection too fast, invading the dog's space. Every single one had tried to break Titan into submission or force him to trust. None had tried to understand why he wouldn't. "Has anyone checked his medical history from the breeder?" Sarah asked. The junior handler blinked. "Medical history? We got his vaccination records, ma'am." "I mean before that. His early development, birth complications, separation from his mother, early socialization exposure." Blank stares all around. Sarah sighed. These were good men, most of them, skilled trainers, but they'd been taught to see military working dogs as weapons to be forged, not living beings with complex psychological needs, and not one of them had thought to look deeper than Titan's teeth. "I'll need access to his breeding records," she said. "Contact information for the European facility, and I want to review all video footage from his training sessions." Master Chief Donovan snorted. "With all due respect, Commander, this isn't some therapy session. That dog's aggressive. He needs a firm hand, not a background check." Sarah turned to face him fully. Donovan was 6'3", broad as a refrigerator, with the kind of presence that made junior sailors snap to attention. She was 5'7" and 130 pounds, but she'd learned long ago that real strength had nothing to do with size. "Master Chief," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the yard, "in 12 years as a SEAL, I've worked with 7 different military working dogs in 4 countries. I've seen what happens when handlers rely only on dominance. I've also seen what happens when you actually understand the animal you're working with." She paused. "Now, you can either help me save this dog's life, or you can stand there and wait for me to fail. Your choice." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Every handler in the compound was watching now. This was the moment, the test. Would the woman SEAL back down? Would she lose her temper? Would she prove she didn't belong? Sarah didn't blink. Finally, Donovan's jaw tightened. "I'll get you the breeding records." He turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with barely contained resentment. Captain Fletcher allowed himself a small smile. "Welcome to Coronado, Commander." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her temporary quarters, a small room in the BOQ with government tissue furniture and walls the color of old paste. Her body ached from the flight, from the tension of the day, from 12 years of fighting for every inch of respect in a world that still saw her gender before her rank. She'd grown up in Sacramento, the daughter of immigrants who'd worked crushing hours at a dry-cleaning business to send her to college. Her father had wanted her to be a doctor. Her mother had wanted her to be safe. Neither had understood when Sarah enlisted in the Navy at 22, fresh out of UC Davis with a degree in animal behavior. "Why do you want to fight?" her mother had asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why do you want to be where you're not welcome?" Sarah hadn't known how to explain it then. She still wasn't sure she could put it into words. It wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about knowing, deep in her bones, that she was capable of more than people assumed. It was about the feeling she got when she accomplished something everyone said was impossible. She'd always understood them better than people. Growing up, while other kids played sports or joined clubs, Sarah had volunteered at the local animal shelter. She'd read every book on canine behavior she could find. She'd learned to read the subtle language of ears, tails, body tension. Dogs didn't lie. Dogs didn't pretend. Dogs reacted to the world with pure honesty. When she'd learned the Navy had military working dogs, something had clicked into place. Here was a way to serve, to use her skills, to work with the animals that made sense to her. But first, she'd had to become a SEAL. Bud's training had nearly broken her. Not physically, she'd been strong enough, fast enough, determined enough. But the isolation had been crushing. The instructors who'd pushed her twice as hard, looking for any excuse to wring her out. The fellow candidates who'd refused to partner with her, certain she'd be the weak link. The night she'd sat shivering in the surf zone. Waves crashing over her head during Hell Week. listening to the men around her speculate about when she'd quit. She hadn't quit. She'd graduated. She'd earned her trident. She'd deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. She'd proven herself in firefights and on night raids, had worked with military working dogs in situations where one mistake meant death. And still, every new assignment meant starting over. Every new team meant facing the same doubt, the same quiet resistance, the same whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the room. Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened the file Captain Fletcher had sent over. Titan's breeding records from a facility outside Brussels. She began to read, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. There, fourth paragraph. Titan had been a twin birth, unusual for dogs. His brother had been stillborn. The mother had been stressed during delivery, requiring emergency intervention. Titan himself had been weak for the first 72 hours, requiring supplemental feeding. Sarah sat back, processing. Early developmental trauma, possible attachment disruption. A dog that had fought for survival from the moment he was born. She thought about the handlers who tried to dominate him, to force him into submission. Of course that hadn't worked. Titan had spent his entire life fighting to survive. Aggression was his first language because trust had never been safe. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister in Sacramento. "Mom's asking about you again. When are you coming home?" Sarah stared at the message. Home, where her mother still kept her childhood bedroom exactly as she'd left it, as if Sarah might give up this life and come back to be the daughter she was supposed to be. Where her father shook his head whenever her Navy career came up, disappointed that his brilliant daughter was risking her life instead of saving lives. She typed back soon, "Tell her I'm fine." It was a lie, and her sister would know it. Sarah hadn't been home in 2 years. Every visit meant facing questions she couldn't answer, judgment she couldn't defend against, love that felt like pressure to be someone she wasn't. She set the phone down and returned to Titan's records. This dog didn't need a handler who would dominate him or coddle him. He needed someone who understood that beneath the aggression was a brilliant, traumatized animal who'd learned that attacking first was the only way to stay safe. The next morning, she arrived at the kennels before dawn. The compound was quiet except for the distant sound of the ocean and the soft panting of dogs in their runs. She'd brought equipment, not the standard training gear, but her own tools, accumulated over years of working with difficult animals. Titan was awake, watching her approach through the chain link. He didn't bark or lunge. He simply sat there perfectly still, analyzing her. "Morning," Sarah said quietly, not approaching the gate yet. She settled onto a bench about 10 feet away, close enough for Titan to observe her, far enough that he wouldn't feel pressured. She pulled out a thermos of coffee and a notebook. And she waited. This was the part most handlers got wrong. They wanted immediate results, immediate progress. They wanted to walk in and start training, start correcting, start shaping behavior. They treated the first interaction like a test the dog had to pass. Sarah knew better. The first interaction wasn't about the dog proving anything. It was about building the foundation for trust, and trust took time. She sat there for an hour, drinking her coffee, making notes about Titan's body language. He watched her the entire time, his head tilted slightly, as if she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. No one had ever just sat with him before. Everyone wanted something from him. "You're going to think I'm crazy," she said conversationally, not looking directly at him. "Talking to a dog who can't answer back. But here's the thing, you understand more than people give you credit for. You understand tone, body language, intention." She paused. "You understand that most people who come here are afraid of you, and fear makes people dangerous." Titan's ears twitched forward slightly. "I'm not afraid of you," Sarah continued. "I've worked with dogs in active combat zones. I've seen what a well-trained military working dog can do, and I've seen what happens when the training breaks down. You're not broken, Titan. You're just stuck with people who don't speak your language." Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't turn around. "Talking to yourself, Commander." Master Chief Donovan's voice carried a mix of amusement and disdain. "Or are you waiting for the dog to answer?" Sarah took another sip of coffee. "Just introducing myself, building rapport." "Rapport." Donovan moved into her peripheral vision, his arms crossed. "That dog doesn't need rapport. He needs discipline, structure. You can't sweet-talk an aggressive animal into compliance." "I'm not trying to sweet-talk him into anything," Sarah said calmly. "I'm trying to understand what made him aggressive in the first place." "He's aggressive because he's dominant. It's pack mentality. You establish yourself as the alpha, or the dog will try to dominate you." Sarah finally looked at Donovan. "The alpha theory has been debunked for 20 years, Master Chief. Even the researcher who proposed it retracted it. Dogs don't operate on linear dominance hierarchies like that." Donovan's face reddened. "I've been training military working dogs since before you were in high school, Commander. I think I know." "With respect, Master Chief, if the old methods worked, Titan wouldn't be scheduled for euthanasia." Sarah's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. "I'm not questioning your experience. I'm saying that this particular dog requires a different approach." "A softer approach, you mean?" "A smarter approach." The tension stretched between them. Other handlers had started to arrive for the morning shift, and they were watching with undisguised interest. A woman contradicting a master chief. This would be talked about for days. Donovan stepped closer, looming over Sarah's seated position. "Let me make something clear, Commander. I don't care what you did in Afghanistan. I don't care about your degree or your theories. This is my kennel, these are my dogs, and when that animal tears into you, and he will, it's on my watch. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by your coffee clutch approach to handling a dangerous dog." Sarah stood up slowly, matching his stare. "Noted, Master Chief. Now let me make something clear to you. Captain Fletcher put me in charge of Titan's rehabilitation. That means for the next 2 weeks he's my responsibility, not yours. You're welcome to observe. You're welcome to learn, but you're not welcome to undermine my work." She paused. "Do we understand each other?" The silence was deafening. Every handler in the compound had stopped what they were doing. A female officer, barely 5'7", standing up to a master chief who'd trained dogs longer than she'd been in the Navy. Donovan's jaw worked silently. For a moment, Sarah thought he might actually explode, might say something that would force a formal confrontation neither of them wanted. Instead, he turned and walked away without another word. Sarah sat back down, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline, not fear. She'd made an enemy today. In a tight-knit community like naval special warfare, that could be career suicide. But she hadn't come here to make friends. She'd come here to save a dog that everyone else had given up on. She looked back at Titan. The big Malinois was standing now, pressed against the fence, watching her with those intense amber eyes. Something had shifted in his gaze. He'd witnessed the confrontation. He'd seen her stand her ground. Dogs understood pack dynamics, even if they didn't operate on them the way people thought. And Titan had just seen that Sarah wouldn't back down. "Yeah," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "I see you too." By mid-morning, word had spread throughout the entire naval special warfare compound. The new female SEAL was butting heads with Master Chief Donovan. Bets were being placed on how long she'd last. Most gave her 3 days before she either quit or got reassigned. Sarah ignored all of it. She had work to do. She spent the morning reviewing every second of video footage from Titan's previous training sessions. What she saw made her stomach turn. Not because of Titan's aggression, that was understandable given the circumstances, but because of what had triggered it. In every single incident, the handler had violated Titan's space without warning. They'd grabbed him, cornered him, used pain-based corrections when he didn't comply fast enough. They treated him like an object to be programmed rather than a living being with boundaries and needs. Jesus, Sarah muttered, watching footage of the second handler using a shock collar set to maximum voltage. You're lucky he only bit you. She made detailed notes, building a profile of Titan's triggers and behavioral patterns. He was reactive to sudden movements near his head. He escalated when he felt cornered. He showed displacement behaviors, yawning, lip-licking, turning his head away, before aggressing, clear signs of stress that every handler had ignored. But there were also moments, brief flickers, where Titan showed curiosity. A toy tossed into his run that he'd investigated. A handler's voice, calm and low, that had made his ears prick forward before anxiety shut him down again. He wasn't a lost cause. He was a scared, brilliant dog who'd learned that humans were unpredictable and dangerous. Sarah could work with that. She spent the afternoon in the kennel, still not entering Titan's run, still just sitting nearby. She brought her lunch and ate it while she worked on her laptop, occasionally talking to Titan about nothing in particular: the weather, the birds flying overhead, stories from her deployment. There was this dog in Helmand, she said, eyes on her screen. Local stray that attached himself to our unit. Mangiest thing you ever saw, half-starved, missing part of an ear. Marines wanted to chase him off, but he kept coming back. Smart. Knew we had food and relative safety. Titan had settled into a lying position, his head on his paws, still watching her. One day we got hit during a patrol. IED strike, then small arms fire, chaos everywhere. And that stray dog, we called him Checkpoint Charlie, he started barking, not at us, at a building off to our left, wouldn't stop. Sarah paused, remembering. Turned out there were 3 insurgents positioned there, waiting to ambush us from behind. Charlie had spotted them before we did. That dog saved lives that day. She looked up at Titan. Everyone wanted to adopt him after that, bring him home, but dogs like Charlie, they're survivors. They trust on their own terms. You can't force it and you can't fake it. You have to earn it. Titan's tail moved slightly. Not a wag exactly, but acknowledgement. I see you, Titan, Sarah said quietly. I see a dog who's been let down by every human he's met. A dog who's smart enough to know that people are dangerous and strong enough to protect himself. That's not aggression. That's survival. She closed her laptop and stood up, stretching. Tomorrow we'll start the real work. But first, you need to know I'm not going anywhere, no matter how long it takes. As she walked away from the kennel, she passed a group of handlers standing near the training building. Their conversation stopped abruptly. One of them, a young petty officer she didn't recognize, muttered something under his breath. The others laughed. Sarah kept walking. She'd learned long ago that responding to every slight, every mocking comment, every doubt would consume all her energy. Better to save that energy for the work. Let the results speak for themselves. But God, she was tired. Tired of being the first woman, the only woman, the woman who had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. Tired of walking into rooms and feeling the temperature drop, seeing the doubt in men's eyes, hearing the whispers that followed her everywhere. She thought about her mother's question, why do you want to be where you're not welcome? Because someone had to go first. Because every barrier she broke down made it easier for the women coming after her. Because despite everything, despite the loneliness and the constant fighting and the weight of representing her entire gender every single day, she was good at this work. And because there was a dog in that kennel who'd been written off by everyone else, and she was damned if she was going to let them give up on him. The call came at 2100 hours, just as Sarah was getting ready for bed. Captain Fletcher's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Commander Chen, we have a situation. Master Chief Donovan has filed a formal complaint about your conduct today. He's alleging insubordination and claiming you're putting personnel at risk with your handling methods. Sarah sat down hard on her rack. Sir, I haven't even begun working directly with Titan yet. I've been observing and building rapport. I know that, you know that. But Donovan's got 20 years of credibility with the brass and Fletcher trailed off. New female and outsider, Sarah finished for him. I wasn't going to put it that way, but yes, Fletcher sighed. Look, I'm on your side here, but I need you to be aware that you're under a microscope. Every decision, every method, every interaction with that dog is going to be scrutinized. And if anything goes wrong, if Titan so much as growls at someone, there are people who will use it as proof that you're not qualified. Understood, sir. Are you sure you want to continue with this? I can probably get you reassigned to a different project, something with less visibility, less risk. Sarah thought about Titan, sitting alone in that kennel. She thought about all the people who tried to break him, to force him into a mold he'd never fit. She thought about every time in her career when someone had offered her the easier path, the safer choice, the option that wouldn't make waves. I'm sure, sir, Titan deserves a real chance. I'm going to give him one. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. You remind me of my daughter, Commander. She's a Marine deployed to Okinawa right now. Smartest, toughest person I know. Also faces this kind of crap every single day. His voice softened. Watch your six out there. You've got more enemies than you think. After the call ended, Sarah sat in the dark for a long time. Through the window, she could hear the distant crash of waves against the beach. Somewhere out there, Titan was lying in his kennel, probably not sleeping, probably alert to every sound and shadow. Two outsiders, she thought. Two individuals that the system didn't quite know what to do with. The difference was, Titan didn't have a choice about being there. Sarah did. She chose this every day. Chose the fight, the scrutiny, the constant pressure to prove herself. Some days she wasn't sure why. Some days the weight of it felt crushing. But then she thought about Charlie, the stray dog in Helmand who'd saved her unit. She thought about the military working dog she'd rehabilitated in Afghanistan, a German shepherd named Rex who'd been so traumatized by an IED blast that he'd refused to work. Everyone had wanted to retire him, send him home broken. Sarah had spent 4 months working with Rex, slowly, patiently rebuilding his confidence. The day he'd finally completed a full patrol without shutting down, the day he'd alerted to an explosive cache that saved dozens of lives, Sarah had cried in her quarters afterward, not from relief, from joy, because she'd given a broken dog his purpose back. Rex was working with a veteran now, in Colorado, helping a former soldier get through panic attacks, providing the steady presence that medication and therapy couldn't quite achieve. That's why Sarah did this. Not for the glory, not to prove anyone wrong. For the moments when a connection formed between human and dog, when trust replaced fear, when a life that everyone else had given up on found new purpose. Titan deserved that chance, and Sarah was going to give it to him, no matter how many people stood in her way. She lay back on her rack, staring at the ceiling and prepared herself for the battle ahead. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Sarah's alarm went off at 4:30. She'd barely slept, her mind running through training protocols and behavioral modification strategies. She dressed quickly in her working uniform, pulled her dark hair back into a tight bun, and headed to the kennels before the California sun had cleared the horizon. Titan was waiting for her, as if he'd known she'd come early. He stood at the front of his run, body tense but not aggressive, eyes tracking her every movement. "Morning, big guy," Sarah said softly, settling onto her usual bench. "Today we start building trust, slow and steady." She'd brought a bag with her, not standard training equipment, but carefully selected items based on what she'd learned about Titan's history and behavioral patterns. High-value treats, not the standard kibble the handlers usually used. A couple of toys with different textures. A long training lead that would give Titan space while maintaining safety. But first, she needed to establish that she could share space with him without threat. Sarah opened her thermos and poured coffee into the lid, the familiar ritual. Then she did something the other handlers hadn't tried. She unlocked Titan's run and stepped just inside the doorway, leaving the gate wide open behind her. Titan's body went rigid. Every muscle coiled, ready to spring. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing impressive teeth. Sarah didn't advance. She simply sat down right there in the doorway, cross-legged, coffee in hand, blocking neither Titan's movement nor his exit. She wasn't cornering him. She wasn't trapping him. She was offering him a choice. "You can leave if you want," she said conversationally. "Gates open. I'm not going to chase you, grab you, or force you to stay. This is your space, and I'm asking permission to be in it." Titan's ears swiveled forward, confusion flickering across his face. This wasn't how handlers behaved. They pushed, demanded, cornered. They never gave the dog a choice. Sarah took a sip of coffee and pulled out her phone, deliberately breaking eye contact. Staring was a threat in dog language. Looking away was a sign of respect, of peaceful intention. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Titan remained standing, wary, but his lips had covered his teeth again. He was processing, analyzing this strange human who wasn't following the script. "I read about your brother," Sarah said quietly. "The one who didn't make it, must have been lonely being the only one, coming into the world fighting." She paused. "I was an only child too for a while. My sister came later, but those first years, I always felt like I didn't quite fit, like I was speaking a different language than everyone around me." Titan took a single step forward, then stopped. Sarah continued looking at her phone, giving him space to be curious without pressure. People think being a SEAL is about being tough, being fearless, but the truth is, we're all scared sometimes. The difference is learning to function through the fear, learning to trust your training and the people beside you. She glanced up briefly, meeting Titan's eyes for just a second before looking away. But trust is hard when people keep letting you down, isn't it? Another step forward. Sarah slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of freeze-dried liver, the high-value treat she'd researched. She tossed it gently, not toward Titan, but off to the side, giving him the option to investigate without approaching her. Titan's nose twitched. He moved toward the treat, sniffed it, then looked back at Sarah with what could only be described as suspicion. "It's not poisoned," Sarah said with a small smile. "Just better than the garbage they've been feeding you. You're an athlete, Titan. You deserve fuel that matches your capabilities." Titan ate the treat. His tail moved slightly, still not a wag but less rigid than before. They sat like that for another 20 minutes, Sarah occasionally tossing treats, never approaching, never demanding. Just existing together in the same space, letting Titan get used to the idea that this human was different. Finally, Sarah stood up slowly, telegraphing her movement. "That's enough for today. You did good work, Titan. Tomorrow we'll do this again." She walked out of the run, secured the gate, and turned to find Master Chief Donovan standing 15 feet away, his face thunderous. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "That was day one of building trust," Sarah replied calmly. "You went into the run of an aggressive dog without a catch pole, without backup, without any safety protocol. You violated every procedure in the manual. I assessed the situation and determined that Titan was stressed by standard handling procedures. I implemented an alternative approach based on his specific behavioral needs." Donovan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You're going to get yourself killed, and when you do, it's my program that takes the hit. My reputation, my kennels." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Your reputation is already taking a hit, Master Chief. You have a dog scheduled for euthanasia because conventional methods failed. I'm trying to save his life. If that bothers you, I suggest you take it up with Captain Fletcher." "I already have, and I'm documenting every reckless decision you make. When this blows up in your face, and it will, there's going to be a clear record that I warned against your approach." "Noted," Sarah said. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have reports to file." She walked past him, her spine straight, refusing to let him see how much the confrontation had shaken her. Her hands were trembling slightly as she entered the administrative building. This was the tightrope she walked every day, being assertive enough to do her job effectively, but not so aggressive that she'd be labeled as difficult or emotional. Men could argue with their superiors and be called passionate or dedicated. When women did it, they were insubordinate or couldn't handle criticism. She filed her report on the morning session, documenting Titan's responses, his body language shifts, the progress, however small, that she'd observed. Then she sent it directly to Captain Fletcher, knowing Donovan would be filing his own version of events. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, "Mom's in the hospital. Nothing serious, just some chest pains. They're running tests. Thought you should know." Sarah's heart clenched. She immediately called her sister. "Hey," Lisa answered on the first ring. "Don't panic, she's fine. They think it was anxiety-related, but they're keeping her overnight for observation." "I should come home," Sarah said. "She doesn't want you to. She specifically said not to interrupt your work." Lisa's voice was gentle. "You know how she is. She'd feel terrible if you flew across the country for something minor." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning against the wall. "Is Dad with her?" "Yeah, he hasn't left her side. Sarah, she's really okay, but—" Lisa hesitated. "She's been stressed. She worries about you constantly. This job, the danger, the fact that you never talk about what you're doing or how you're really holding up." "I'm fine." "Are you?" Lisa asked quietly. "Because you sound exhausted, and you only use that voice when you're fighting battles you won't tell me about." Sarah wanted to tell her sister everything. About Titan, about Donovan, about walking into work every day knowing that half the people there were waiting for her to fail. About the loneliness of being the first, the only, the constant representative of every woman who might come after. But she'd learned long ago not to burden her family with the weight she carried. They already worried too much. "I'm working with a difficult dog," Sarah said instead. "It's challenging, but it's important work. I'm okay, Lisa, really." After they hung up, Sarah sat alone in the empty office, fighting back tears she wouldn't let fall. Her mother was in the hospital, stressed about a daughter who couldn't explain why she chose this life. Her father was disappointed in career choices he'd never understand. And she was here, thousands of miles away, fighting to save a dog while making enemies of people who should have been her colleagues. Sometimes she wondered if her mother was right. If all this fighting, all this proving, all this constant battling against systems that didn't want her there, was it worth it? Then she thought about Titan, taking that first tentative step toward her this morning. About the way his eyes had shown curiosity instead of just fear. About the fact that in 20 minutes, she'd made more progress than 3 previous handlers had in months. Yes, it was worth it. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Sarah arrived early, spent time with Titan using the same gentle approach, sharing space, offering choices, building positive associations. Each day, Titan relaxed a little more. By day 4, he was eating treats from her hand. By day 5, he allowed her to touch his shoulder briefly. The progress was undeniable, but it didn't stop the whispers. "She's got 1 week left," Sarah overheard one of the junior handlers saying. "My money says Titan bites her before then." "Nah, she's too careful. She'll run out of time without showing any real progress. Fletcher will have to put the dog down anyway." Either way, it proves what we already knew. Women can't handle this work. Sarah kept her head down, focused on Titan, ignored the commentary. But it wore on her, a constant drip of doubt and dismissal that eroded her confidence like water on stone. On day 6, Captain Fletcher called her into his office. "Commander, I need to be straight with you," he said, his face grave. "Master Chief Donovan has filed 3 formal complaints about your methods. He's got support from other handlers who say you're being reckless, that you're prioritizing your theories over safety." "Sir, I've documented every session. Titan's showing measurable progress." I know, I've read your reports, but Donovan's not wrong that you're operating outside standard protocols. Fletcher leaned back in his chair. The brass is getting nervous. They're talking about pulling the plug early, putting Titan down this week, instead of giving you the full 2 weeks. Sarah's stomach dropped. Sir, I just need more time, Titan's responding. I can give you until the end of the week. Friday. That's 4 more days. You need to show that Titan can perform basic commands, that he's safe enough to continue training. If you can't demonstrate that, Fletcher spread his hands. I'm sorry, Commander. I fought for you, but there's only so much political capital I can spend. Sarah left the office feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. 4 days. She'd been building trust slowly, carefully, following proper behavioral modification protocols. But now she needed to accelerate, to push faster than was ideal, because the bureaucracy demanded measurable results on an arbitrary timeline. She thought about all the times in her career when she'd faced similar pressure. Perform immediately, prove yourself now, show us you belong. No time for learning curves, no room for the gradual development that male colleagues were routinely afforded. That evening, she worked with Titan longer than usual, trying to introduce basic commands while maintaining the trust they'd built. He was receptive to sit when she used hand signals, less so with stay. Any time she tried to put a collar on him, he'd tense up, remembering previous handlers who'd used collars to hurt him.